You think you know the birds in your yard. I thought I did too. You've watched them long enough to recognize the regulars. Your cardinal on the fence rail every morning, your chickadees cycling through the feeder in pairs, your mourning doves doing whatever mourning doves do on the ground beneath everything else. You've noticed the way the yard goes quiet before a hawk shows up. You've had mornings where you stood at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee and felt like something out there was paying attention to you. Not the feeder, but you. And then told yourself you were projecting. I'm not sure you were projecting. My name is Daniel. I've been watching a small suburban yard in Northern Virginia for about 5 years now. I have a northern cardinal with a small notch in the primary feathers of his right wing who has been visiting since November 2020. I have a chickadee pair I think of as the Tuesday couple because for 4 winters running, they've showed up at my feeder every Tuesday morning around 7. I have a crow family I've been watching long enough to have a nickname for. And the longer I pay attention, the more I find myself reading research and landing on the same conclusion. I understand less about what happens in this yard than I thought I did. This video is about 8 behaviors your backyard birds perform every day. Real, documented, studied in some cases for decades, that science still does not have the complete blueprint for. Not sort of knows, not almost knows. Openly, honestly, on the record, does not have the final answer. Welcome. If you're new here, subscribe before we go any further. Stay until number 8. That's the one I've thought about the longest, and the one I have the least clean answer for. Let's start with the one that changed the way I look at every bird I've ever seen. Number 1, seeing something no human can see. Right now, at your feeder, there may be a bird that can see the magnetic field of the earth. Not sense it vaguely, not feel a directional pull the way an old compass does. See it as an actual visual experience overlaid on the world the bird already perceives. Here is what the research says, and I want to be precise because I've described this slightly wrong before. Inside the eye of a migratory bird, researchers at the University of Oldenburg have identified a light-sensitive protein called cryptochrome. When this protein is struck by blue light, it triggers something called a radical pair reaction, a quantum mechanical event in which 2 electrons become entangled. The direction of the Earth's magnetic field appears to influence the spin state of those electrons, and that spin state may translate into something the bird perceives: a visual signal, an overlay, a sense of magnetic orientation built directly into the eye itself. This is not a compass needle. This is not a GPS signal. This is not a map in any sense you or I have a reference point for. What the research proposes is that a bird can look at your yard and simultaneously perceive magnetic north, not as a feeling, but as something it sees. The full mechanism, how a quantum event in the retina becomes a navigation signal in the brain the bird can act on, is still being worked out. Work published in Nature describes the process as plausible and consistent with available evidence. That phrase is science being careful. It is not science being done. The European robin, the garden warbler, and the bobolink are the species most studied in this research. But the ruby-throated hummingbird that visits your yard weighs 3 grams, smaller than your thumb, and crosses more than 500 miles of open Gulf water every spring with nowhere to land, returning to within meters of your feeder in roughly the same week as the year before. Something is navigating that crossing with extraordinary precision. We think we know what parts of it are. We cannot yet fully explain how those parts become the whole. Number 2, singing at 3 in the morning for no reason science can name. At 3:17 a.m. on a night in mid-January, when the temperature in your yard is 19 degrees and the ground is frozen and nothing is moving, a bird near your back fence may be singing. Not alarm calls, not contact calls. Song. Structured, species-typical, fully formed territorial song of the kind you associate with spring mornings and breeding season and a yard that hasn't been frozen since October. It is January. It is 3 in the morning. No territory needs defending at this hour. Nobody is listening. And yet, this happens. It happens in cities more than in rural areas, which gives researchers their leading suspect: artificial light. Streetlights and lit windows are thought to mistrigger the internal clocks of songbirds, causing off-season, off-hour singing. That part is reasonably supported. But here's what makes this different. The songs documented in these studies are not fragments or errors. They are complete, properly structured, the real thing, performed in the cold and the dark, for an apparent audience of no one. What is the bird doing? Researchers have offered several explanations. Some believe it is a circadian malfunction triggered by light pollution. Others believe night song may serve a social function that hasn't been identified yet. A third line of research connects it to sleep vocalization. Work on juvenile zebra finches has documented those birds replaying their learned songs during sleep, consolidating vocal memory the way humans consolidate motor memory during REM sleep. Whether something similar happens in wild adult birds in your yard on a January night is not established. I think about the Tuesday couple when I sit with this. My chickadee pair, 4 winters at my 7 a.m. feeder, reliable enough that I've stopped being surprised by them. What are they doing at 3 in the morning? What is any bird doing in the dark hours before your yard wakes up? I used to assume the answer was nothing interesting. I don't assume that anymore. Number 3, hearing the earth itself. Here is a number worth sitting with. The lowest sound a human ear can detect is somewhere around 20 hertz, 20 cycles per second. Birds can hear down to 1/10 of a hertz. That is 200 times below the floor of your hearing. At that frequency, you are not hearing sound the way you think about it. You are hearing geology. You are hearing the slow swell of ocean hundreds of miles away. You are hearing the infrasonic signature of mountain ranges, coastlines, and river systems, the acoustic shape of the terrain beneath you. You are hearing the low-frequency precursor of a major storm system before any visible sign of it appears on any screen you have access to. Birds can hear all of this. Research on pigeon navigation coming out of institutions in Europe and confirmed by follow-up studies over the past 2 decades has built a strong case that pigeons navigate in part by using infrasound landmarks, literally hearing the shape of the land beneath them in frequencies your ears cannot touch. The complete infrasound map a pigeon constructs across its lifetime has not been described. We know they are using this information. We do not yet know the full system. What this means for your yard is specific. Every bird passing through your space, your dark-eyed juncos that appeared in October, your mourning doves on the ground all year, the ruby-throated hummingbird that will come back to your feeder in a few weeks, is experiencing an acoustic version of the world you cannot access. The yard you see through your kitchen window and the yard they hear are not the same place. They are living inside a sensory environment you cannot enter. I find that genuinely hard to shake. The birds in your yard know things about where they are that you will never know, and they know them through a sense you simply do not have. Number 4, predicting the storm before anyone else does. In the spring of 2014, researchers in the Cumberland Mountains watched 9 golden-winged warblers abandon their nesting territory. These birds weigh 9 grams, less than a packet of sugar. They had just completed a long migration. They were at the start of breeding season. They left anyway, traveling as far as 900 miles to the south, and returned 5 days later. What they were fleeing was a tornado outbreak that killed 35 people across the southeastern United States. They left 1 to 2 days before the system arrived, before the storm was visible in their region, before any forecast at their location would have suggested leaving. The study, published in Current Biology by a team led by Henry Strebe, confirmed the birds had detected something ahead of the storm. The leading candidate is infrasound, the low-frequency acoustic signature a major pressure system generates as it builds, traveling hundreds of miles ahead of any visible weather. The warbler had heard what was coming from 900 miles away and made a calculated decision to leave breeding territory it had traveled hundreds of miles to reach. Stay with me here, because this is the part that hasn't been explained. How does a 9-gram bird convert an infrasonic signal It cannot consciously analyze into a behavioral decision to leave. What is the threshold that tips it? What does the internal experience of that moment feel like for the bird, if it feels like anything at all? If you watch your yard closely enough across enough seasons, you will notice the feeder empties before major storms in a way that is different from the quick scatter of a hawk sighting. It's gradual, deliberate. It begins hours before the weather changes. I used to think I was imagining it. After learning about the warbler study, I stopped deciding I was imagining it and started just writing down when it happens. Number 5, building a coalition with strangers. Go out to your yard on a cold morning in late February and stand quietly for 10 minutes. If you have a tree line nearby, you may see a small, loose group moving through the branches together. Tufted titmice, white-breasted nuthatches, black-capped chickadees, maybe a downy woodpecker working the bark on the far side of the oak. Different species, different feeding strategies, moving through your yard together, deliberately, as a unit. They are sharing information in real time. Research on mixed species foraging flocks, including work from Cornell and the University of Cambridge, has established that these groups form around nuclear species, typically the tufted titmouse in your part of the eastern United States, with satellite species joining because the group improves predator detection for everyone in it. When one bird raises an alarm, every species in the flock responds. The alarm calls between species encode specific information: flying hawk versus perched hawk, close threat versus distant one, serious versus dismissible. Every bird in that group reads the calls of every other species with apparent understanding. Here is where the science hits a wall. These species did not co-evolve together in every environment where you observe them doing this. A white-breasted nuthatch and a tufted titmouse share a feeder edge in your yard, not a long enough shared evolutionary history to account for how they read each other's alarm syntax. The information transfer between species lines goes beyond simple startle response, and the mechanism by which birds across families come to understand each other, this specifically is not established. The Hatfields, my crow family, 3 or 4 birds I've been watching for about 3 years, stop and look when chickadees alarm from across the yard. They respond with what I can only describe as comprehension. How much of the conversation happening in your yard right now is one you're not equipped to follow? The honest answer, the one I keep landing on, is this: significantly more than I used to think. Number 6, what your feeder might be doing that nobody asked about. You think the feeder in your yard is neutral. I thought the same thing for a long time. I want to be honest about why I'm including this item, because I almost cut it. It made me uncomfortable to research, and it is going to make you a little uncomfortable too, and I want to be careful. This is not a reason to take your feeder down. The research doesn't say that, but it is worth knowing. Research from the University of Exeter, led by Kate Plummer and a team of collaborators, has tracked feeder-supplemented wild bird populations against non-supplemented control groups over multiple years. What the data shows is that birds with consistent feeder access differ measurably from birds without it, in breeding timing, in body condition, in the frequency of certain behaviors. That part isn't surprising. Here is where it gets less comfortable. Some of these differences appear to accumulate across generations. Feeder supplementation may be selecting at the population level for birds that are bolder, more tolerant of humans, more reliant on supplemental food than their counterparts in unfeeded areas. We may be running a long-term, uncontrolled selection experiment in backyard ecology across the continent. Nobody approved the protocol. Nobody knows yet exactly what we're selecting for. I've had 2 feeders up for 5 years. I did not ask what I might be changing. I'm asking now, and I don't have a good answer, and I don't think anyone fully does yet. Here is what I want you to take from this, because I learned a version of this lesson the hard way with a bright orange jacket and a fledgling I had no business touching. I was not a neutral presence in my yard. I had never been. I just hadn't been paying attention to what I was doing. You are not neutral in your yard either. What you do out there matters in ways that extend further than you might expect. That is not a reason to feel guilty. It is a reason to pay attention. The most honest thing I can offer you on this one is, what you put out in your yard is not just a gift. It is a relationship, and relationships change both parties. Number 7. Coming home to within feet of the same branch. The ruby-throated hummingbird that visited your feeder last summer weighs 3 grams. It crossed more than 500 miles of open Gulf water in a single non-stop flight before spending the winter somewhere in Central America. And sometime in the next few weeks, depending on where you are in the eastern United States, it is going to come back, not to your general neighborhood, to your yard, to within meters of where your feeder hung. Within 7 to 10 days of the same week, it arrived the year before. Cornell's Feeder Watch program and banding studies have confirmed this pattern across enough cases that site fidelity in migratory birds is not in question. What is still being mapped is the full mechanism. The magnetic compass is part of it. Visual landmark memory is part of it. Stellar navigation is likely part of it. But how does a 3-gram bird do it? How does it integrate a quantum magnetic signal with visual memory, with star map data? How does it make a navigation decision precise enough to find your specific deck after 6 months and 500 miles? We simply do not have the complete picture. We call it philopatry. We can observe it in your yard every spring. We still don't have the blueprint for how those pieces lock together into the precision you see when your hummingbird appears in May. There's something worth sitting with in that. The bird does something extraordinary. Science can describe the components of how. The explanation for how those components become the whole is still being written, carefully, by people who want to get it right. I find that honest in a way I appreciate. I'm trying to do the same thing here. Number 8. Choosing you. I've saved this one for last because it has to be last. There is a northern cardinal who visits my yard with a small notch in the primary feathers of his right wing. I first noticed him in November 2020, the week after my father died. I want to be careful about how I say what comes next. I'm not going to tell you this bird is a message. I'm not going to tell you he isn't. What I can tell you is exactly what the science says and exactly where it stops. The research on individual human recognition in birds is most rigorously documented in American crows. Work from the University of Washington, led by John Marsleff, established that crows can recognize individual human faces, hold a threat or trust assessment for that specific face for years, and communicate that assessment to crows who have never met the person. The mechanism is well documented. What is far less studied, and to my knowledge not yet cleanly explained across species, is why certain individual birds appear to actively seek out certain individual people. It is not territory. It is not hunger. Other birds feed in the same space at the same time. It is not a simple conditioned response to a reliable food source, because what I am describing is different from that in ways I have spent 4 winters trying to find clean language for, and haven't. What it looks like, after 4 winters of watching the same bird return to the same corner of my yard, is something I do not have a scientific name for. I'm still trying to figure out what to make of it. The notched feather cardinal has come to my yard somewhere between 300 and 400 times by rough count. He does not come every day. He does not come on any schedule I've been able to map. But when I stand at the kitchen window on a hard morning, the kind of morning where the coffee doesn't fix anything and the light through the glass is gray and thin, he appears with a frequency I cannot account for without making assumptions I'm not willing to make out loud. I'm not going to explain it away. I'm not going to dress it up. What I can tell you is that science, as of right now, does not have a full answer for why some birds seem to choose some yards, some windows, some people to land near and look at. That question is at the edge of what the research currently touches. It may not be answered soon. And I find, more and more, that I don't entirely mind that. Not knowing is the thing I keep coming back to. I used to think not knowing was a problem to fix. I've spent 5 years standing at this window, and I've started to think it might just be the right response to a yard full of things you don't have all the answers for. The birds in your yard are navigating by quantum mechanics, hearing geological features you have no access to, predicting tornado systems from 900 miles away, recognizing your face, building coalitions across species that share no common evolutionary language, and quietly changing in ways connected to the feeders you've been filling for years. They are doing all of this in a yard you think of as small, ordinary, suburban. There is nothing ordinary about what's happening out there. The next time you stand at your kitchen window on a morning when the yard is just coming back to life, your cardinal on the fence, your chickadees working through the maple, the nuthatch running headfirst down your sweet cage, hold this. The bird you're watching right now is doing something the best researchers in this field still cannot completely map. That has always been true. You just know it now. Tell me in the comments, is there something a bird in your yard has done that you still can't explain? Something you noticed and filed away because you didn't know what to do with it? I want to hear about it. I read everyone. I'll see you in the next one.